We go beyond the headlines now with special assignment and the battle for the subbase at Groton.
It looks like Friday is decision day, and Groton could very well be on the hit list, which is why so many people in the state are awfully anxious right now.
And why a new word has become so common, BRAC, an acronym for Base Realignment and Closure.
Throughout this week, Fox 61 News will devote an extraordinary amount of time covering this important issue because, well, the stakes are so high.
And tonight we begin our week-long series of special reports with a look inside the gates. What's really there at Groton, and why should it survive when some bases somewhere will surely close? America's military strategy hinges on air superiority. We have air superiority because we have aircraft carriers. And we have aircraft carriers because we have the world's stealthiest fleet of submarines to protect them.
No submarine made by America has ever been detected. They are so stealthy.
Experts say our unique combination of advanced technology and precision training is unrivaled by any subfleet in the world, and a major reason we won the Cold War.
Fast attack nuclear submarines and the technology that they had successfully convinced the Soviet submarine navy that we were not to be troubled with.
The fact that both the technology and the training happen here in Groton at Electric Boat and the Groton subbase respectively makes this the submarine capital of the world. And according to those who are fighting to keep the base open, a keystone in America's military strategy.
We believe we're critical to the national defense.
Connecticut gave the Navy 112 acres on the banks of the Thames River back in 1868. A so-called protected harbor, it offered shelter from adverse weather. That yard became the Navy's first subbase in 1915. The main base now occupies more than 680 acres, with 230 buildings valued at $914 million. 7,800 military personnel are stationed at the base, with another 1,400 civilian employees. 650 reservists drill there each year. The annual combined payroll is $452 million. The annual combined utility bill is $17,870,000. Home port to 18 nuclear attack subs, the base creates a unique synergy for the Navy by putting thousands of submariners of all ranks and specialties virtually next door to those who design and build the subs. To give you an idea of how the subbase affects life here in Groton, this is Pleasant Valley Elementary School. They begin the school year every fall with about 500 students. They end the school year every spring with about 500 students. But it's a different 500 at the end of the year. Complete turnover of the student body during the course of the school year. They're all children of the people training at the Groton subbase. In fact, 40% of all students in the Groton Public Schools are children of active duty military personnel. The 700 full-time and 200 to 300 part-time teachers, administrators, and other staff members would be dramatically affected by the loss of the subbase. It's unclear how the fate of Electric Boat is tied to the fate of the base, but according to a new report by the state of Connecticut, the two, plus the so-called spin-off industries they support, contribute 31,500 jobs and $3.3 billion to Connecticut's economy. But the hard reality is the BRAC Commission's decision is based on America's defense needs in the future, not the past. So neither the long and distinguished history of the subbase nor the sobering impact on Connecticut's economy will weigh as heavily on the BRAC Commission as the base's strategic value to future naval operations.
My hope is that folks at the Pentagon are sensible enough to know that in the middle of a war, you don't close a base like Groton, submarine base. It's just too valuable.
If you've been around for a while, you might remember the Groton subbase was on the closure list during previous BRAC rounds, and local leaders fought to save it. We're going beyond the headlines now with special assignment and the battle for the subbase at Groton.
We'll know Friday which military bases are slated to close when Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld issues his list.
If the Groton subbase is on that list, Connecticut and especially the Groton, New London area are in for some hard times.
Fox 61's Rebecca Stewart continues our week-long in-depth coverage of the battle for the base by taking us inside the impact zone.
My home is here, said the rabbit.
It's a big week at Pleasant Valley Elementary School in Groton, while kindergartners hone reading skills.
My favorite story is Who Lives Here?
The adults in their lives are asking that same question. Who will live here? Who will go to school here? What happens to us if the Groton subbase is on the list?
There is a lot of anxiety, whether it's spoken or not. Everybody's anxious.
We talk about it here at school, wondering what's going to happen to our families and our children.
Families like 5-year-old Kaylin's.
Where's your daddy right now?
Underwater in the sea.
She is like 97% of these students from an active military family. Should the base close, all of them would go.
We are interlinked and intertwined, and we are all concerned.
Superintendent Dr. James Mitchell is another, anxiously awaiting the list.
We're looking at possibly closing schools if this happens. We're looking at losing students. We're looking at redistricting the remaining students in our community. We're looking at a loss of staff.
You don't have to look far to see how interconnected the community is and why closing the base would affect just about everyone. Because it's likely Kaylin's dad goes to the dry cleaner down the street. But Faye has been here for decades. More than half his business comes directly from the base.
We're right in the middle now of the uniform change from blues to whites, and so we're pretty busy.
Busy, the way Bud likes it, at the cleaners and his coffee shop next door. Without the base, he says, there's not much of a business.
Locally, it would be a terrible hardship for a lot of people, myself included.
Kaylin's dad might then pop into the barber shop 2 doors down.
Regular tape on the back. Block it.
The haircuts are different. The conversations are often a lot alike.
Well, what is your feelings on the closing of the base?
Closing of the base? Well, I hope not. It's a good, vital asset. A lot of people lose their jobs.
Submarine memorabilia papers the walls of Joe Cortella Jr.'s place. This is his customer base, and the base has everything to do with it.
Since I've been a little boy, that's all you heard is electric boat and a sub base. You know what I mean? I can't picture it, gone.
These are the people behind the numbers. When you hear Connecticut would lose $2.5 billion and 25,000 jobs, that means Bud and Joe. When Representative Rob Simmons talks about schools and real estate, he's talking about Kaylin, her teachers, and their homes.
We have Navy families sending their children to those schools, and we're so happy to have them there. And you have housing and real estate. We have hundreds of Navy families who live off the base in the community. And if the base was to close, they would go away, and you would run the risk of collapsing the real estate market.
Kaylin probably doesn't know just how much people depend on her dad and how much the community depends on keeping him here.
I get to talk to him when he ports. That means when he lands somewhere.
Right now, folks in Groton hope they don't land on the base closure list. On special assignment, Rebecca Stewart, FOX 61 News at 10.
In addition to the economic losses, there are also incredible costs associated with the environmental cleanup of closed military bases. 10 years ago, the Department of Defense estimated cleaning up any closed base would cost between $7 and $13 billion. Today, those estimates are more like $30 billion. Tomorrow night on special assignment, Inside the Ripple Effect, how the base's possible closing would affect all of us well beyond the Groton, New London area. The economic role the base plays across the state tomorrow night on special assignment.
A federal bankruptcy judge calls it the least bad of the available.
We're going beyond the headlines now with special assignment and the battle for the sub-base at Groton.
We'll know Friday which military bases are slated to close when Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld issues his list.
If the Groton sub-base is on that list, the closure's impact would ripple hundreds of miles beyond Groton.
As Fox 61's Lori Perez tells us, that's why everyone from high-tech manufacturers to low-tech bakeries is more than a bit nervous this week.
Their docks sit side by side, their workers shoulder to shoulder. Electric Boat is more than a neighbor and business partner to the Groton subbase. They're like two sides of the same coin. On any given day, EB has 500 workers at the base doing repairs and maintenance. Everyday sailors are up at EB, helping engineers design and test new product.
All of these people are working together, and that makes for better submarines.
Connecticut leaders say one of their best arguments against closing Groton is that design and defense synergy with Electric Boat. EB has 8,700 workers in the Groton, New London area, workers in high-tech jobs. And if they don't work, some say neither do thousands more across Connecticut.
We did a preliminary analysis in November of '03 of what could be the future if the subbase closed and Electric Boat closed. Kind of a domino effect. And the preliminary numbers that we got from the Connecticut Economic Resources Center was $2.5 billion annually would be lost in our gross domestic product.
Electric Boat says it has orders to build 30 submarines and will stay in business no matter what happens to the subbase. But clearly, they would prefer the short commute to Groton over, say, Norfolk, Virginia.
Logic has to play a big part in the decision process, and there's overwhelming logic that argues for the submarine base to remain open.
State leaders have compiled a list of 526 official base suppliers, companies from Stonington in the southeast corner to Salisbury in the northwest. In the middle, actually middle field, is Todd DiPentima at Pegasus Manufacturing with a big stake in keeping Groton open.
They don't think about us. They think about Electric Boat and the probably local businesses in that Groton area, but it will definitely affect business a much larger radius than what's down there.
Pegasus makes parts for the Virginia-class subs and the Seawolf. His company has grown from 8 workers to 130, working on projects so sensitive we can't even know about them.
I really can't be too specific.
But he's making it no secret that closing the base would be a blow. Submarine work is a huge chunk of his business, and he's a major supplier for the base, yet no one from the BRAC Commission asked him for input.
Everybody's fighting to survive. And it was funny that nobody came around to talk to us about that.
Enfield is 66 miles from the subbase. At Diana's Bakery, the ovens and the work are about as far removed from designing and operating submarines as you can get. But the connection is real. They're one of hundreds of companies not on the official suppliers list, but supplying nonetheless.
We deliver there 5 days a week. We're there at 4 o'clock every morning, delivering fresh bread, bagels, and donuts, and different kind of dessert pastries.
If it weren't for the military and private sector folks who work in and around the submarines, Diana's probably wouldn't even bother making the trek down I-91 to Route 2 to southeastern Connecticut. Lose the base and someone will lose his job, if not at Diana's, somewhere down the line.
There's drivers, there's people that take the orders, that support the account. There's bakers that produce the product. There's people that supply our ingredients, our flour and our sugar, and I mean, it goes right down the road, you know. So it affects, you know, one account affects hundreds of people if you go all the way down to, you know, people that manufacture raw ingredients to the end product, to delivering it.
Depending on who you talk to, the statistics vary. The most recent study suggests that the subbase, Electric Boat, and spin-off companies account for even more than previously thought. 31,500 jobs and $3.3 billion across the state. It all adds up to this. Business people are hoping the numbers are big enough to keep the subbase afloat. On special assignment, I'm Lori Perez, Fox 61 News at 10.
Tomorrow night in Special Assignment, we'll go inside the political battle to save the subbase. What are our lawmakers doing so we stay off that list? And what happens if Groton is recommended to close? Tomorrow night in Special Assignment. We're going beyond the headlines now with Special Assignment and trying to save the Groton subbase.
All week, we've taken you inside the base, around Groton, and across the state, exposing the devastating economic and social ripple effects closing the base would have on Connecticut.
Tonight, we go inside the political battle, and make no mistake, it's hardball. The players are congressmen, senators, governors, and state lawmakers.
But as Fox 61's Rick Hancock tells us, there's a good chance you've never heard of Connecticut's key player.
John Markowitz has never held public office, but as the leader of the Subbase Realignment Coalition, he's the state's best political navigator when it comes to keeping the Groton submarine base off the government hit list.
I understand the rules.
Markowitz is a retired Navy officer, and for the past 2 years, he's led the Save the Base campaign with 3 key objectives. 1, stay off the Pentagon's closure list. 2, spread the word about Groton's military and economic importance. And 3,
the third phase is get off the list if you're on the list, or look over your shoulder if you're not on the list to make sure somebody doesn't put you on the list.
Tomorrow's hit list will be generated by Defense Secretary Rumsfeld. Markowitz has been the expert behind Connecticut's elected leaders as they pitched Groton's worth to anyone who would listen.
There have been meetings with principals in the Department of Defense and the Department of the Navy.
Markowitz has been through these rough seas before. The subbase was on the hit list twice in the 90s, but the realignment coalition was instrumental in saving it. This time, he says the process has been played a lot closer to the vest. In fact, it's been a wall of silence that Connecticut's well-connected congressional leaders have not been able to scale.
The ability of the federal delegation, our senators, Dodd and Lieberman, and our representatives, primarily Congressman Simmons, to impact that has been minimal. They have tried.
And the silence has some asking if Groton, in a blue state that did not vote to re-elect President Bush, is at heightened risk for closure. Democratic Senator Christopher Dodd says no.
We've got a Republican governor, half our delegation are Republican members of the House. Red state, blue state, I don't think I hope it doesn't play a role.
Republican Congressman Rob Simmons, who has the most to win or lose politically, isn't so sure. The subbase sits in his district. Simmons says it took a fair amount of backroom politics just to get someone with Connecticut ties on the BRAC, the Base Realignment and Closure Commission.
Information in there.
Insiders say it took a flurry of high-level phone calls from Governor Rell, Senators Dodd and Lieberman, and Simmons to get retired Air Force General Lloyd Fig Newton a seat at the BRAC Commission. Newton is now a vice president with East Hartford's Pratt & Whitney.
There's not supposed to be politics, but we know there's politics. I mean, my gosh, there was politics in getting people onto the commission, and we had to fight very hard to get our person. But Virginia got initially several people, and California got 2 people. And so there is politics. You can't eliminate politics.
Connecticut's usually fractious state politics have become, well, cooperative when it comes to trying to save the Groton subbase. Both parties know everyone in the state would be negatively affected if the base closes, so there was bipartisan support for spending hundreds of thousands of state tax dollars on Markowitz's group and to hire a Pentagon consultant.
Nobody's really caring in this battle whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Nobody's really caring whether I'm running against the governor or the governor is running against me. This is all about the quality of life in Connecticut and the history of Connecticut's contribution to the nation's defense.
And for better or worse, State Senator Cook has put aside all other legislative responsibilities, issues, and political differences while she has campaigned to save the subbase.
There's only one issue for me. It's only number one priority this legislative session is to save the base and to save the submarine defense industry in the state of Connecticut, because the alternative is absolutely unthinkable.
On special assignment, Rick Hancock, Fox 61 News at 10.
The Fox 61 News at 10 begins right now.
Friday the 13th turns into an historic day in Connecticut with 2 blockbuster stories.
This is a blow this morning to Connecticut and to our nation's security.
First, the Pentagon's hit list targets the Groton subbase for closure, a move that could cost the state thousands of jobs and billions of dollars. And Connecticut carries out its first execution in 45 years.
The execution of Michael Bruce Ross has been carried out in the manner prescribed by the laws of the state of Connecticut.
Good evening. We'll have extensive coverage of both these historic and emotional stories. We begin with Groton.
Frankly, everyone knew it could happen. Very few thought it actually would. Everyone, seasoned politicians and ordinary citizens alike, seemed shocked, like they were kicked in the gut.
The Groton base is home to 18 submarines, but more importantly, 8,600 jobs are there, and thousands more around the state depend on the base.
There's no putting a good spin on today's news, but as Fox 61 Sarah Cody tells us, state politicians aren't giving up. They're gearing up for a big-time battle.
To close this base is unthinkable.
Words of emotion and true determination.
It ain't over till it's over, and it's not over yet.
These Connecticut leaders first learned of the government's subbase recommendation when Senator Joseph Lieberman's cell phone rang early this morning.
He said complete closure. That was his first words, and I went, my heart just, it does now. I can't tell you what that means.
Governor Jody Rell believes this decision was based on suspicious data. Next week, she will put a new strike force to work, analyzing every word of the Department of Defense report.
They will look for the inaccuracies in information and the faulty assumptions, find the flaws, suggest solutions.
Finding flaws with the software they've used or the criteria they've used to evaluate that data might be an issue.
Recently, the government invested $300 million in the base. Lieberman says this plan doesn't make sense financially.
When you think about closing this facility, God forbid, about closing a nuclear facility with hazardous materials all around it, the costs are going to be astronomical.
Or tactically, the government wants to consolidate bases to Georgia and Virginia.
We live in an age of terrorism. We found on September 11th that our enemy will strike us here at home. We forget in this recommendation the lesson of Pearl Harbor.
The base has been on the hit list before, most recently in 1993. Rel believes it can be saved again through hard work every day between now and early September, when the final recommendations go to the president.
We have 31,500 reasons to keep fighting, and fight we will.
John Markowitz of the local subbase coalition quoted Winston Churchill for inspiration.
Never, ever give up.
So what will happen between now and Christmas? Markowitz says 2 members of the commission will visit the base sometime in the next 2 months, and then there will be a public hearing. In the meantime, he says this intense battle will continue. In Groton, Sarah Cody, Fox 61 News at 10.
Senator Chris Dodd was unable to attend this morning's base gathering, but he issued this statement. I am outraged by the recommendations submitted by the Secretary of Defense today. He is dead wrong. Closing Subbase New London would be harmful to Connecticut, wrong for the Navy, and most importantly, dangerous to U.S. national security. Connecticut is certainly the state hit hardest by the decision.
30% of all the national job cuts will be here. Senior Navy officers say that of the 3 sub-bases under consideration, Groton was the easiest to close. Kings Bay, Georgia is equipped for ballistic missile submarines. Norfolk, Virginia is home to much of the Atlantic Fleet and can more easily handle new ships. The Navy's top local brass says all things considered, closing Groton makes sense.
These recommendations will place the right capabilities in the right places, match facilities to forces, and allow us to invest resources where they are most needed.
I think the morale that I've seen so far is one of surprise because there has been no decisions that have been leaked out at any time early. So everyone is just trying to react to new information. I think it will take some time to digest.
But one military analyst in Washington says closing Groton leaves a big hole in the Navy's mid-Atlantic presence. Now, right next door to the base is Electric Boat. The two are closely tied together, designing the subs.
The leaders like to call it synergy. Every day, hundreds of EB workers are on the base working with the Navy. In a statement, EB says it will support all efforts to reverse the closure decision. While EB acknowledges closing the base could eventually impact how many employees they have, the company says it intends to remain in business even if the base eventually closes. EB says it has back orders for 30 more subs. Groton is an economic engine that fuels businesses statewide, and without the subs, everyone will feel the effects.
But the first riptide is likely to sweep through the towns in and around Groton. How did the area's small business owners act to today's news? Fox 61's Jim Altman is live in Mystic tonight with that part of the story. Jim?
And if the subbase is the heart of Groton, then the businesses here and the businesses owners are the soul. And all of them tonight told us they're not going down without a fight. For a submarine town, it's a depth no one wanted to reach.
My feeling is stunned.
I think it is analogous to someone that's just been told they have cancer. In shock, disbelief.
If the subbase closes, the economic ripples begin. It's estimated the state could lose as many as 31,000 jobs, and that's not including the so-called induced jobs, like jobs from small businesses right here in Groton. Bud Fay owns Pop's Kitchen and the next door laundromat, which is just a block or so from the subbase gates.
65% of my business comes from the military. There are bad things that can happen to good people, whether you like it or not.
And with a vacant subbase, Nancy Keenan could have many more vacancies at the Groton Inn. 80% of her business comes from the base.
It would be devastating to our existing base of business.
There are tens of thousands of businesses in southeastern Connecticut, like Pop's Kitchen, the local car wash, the small real estate office, that are going to be impacted by this much greater than the EBs and the Pfizers of the world.
Groton Town Mayor Harry Watson says what we heard all day. Everyone here is prepared to navigate through the troubled waters.
I hate to use the analogy of the Red Sox. They were in the bottom of the ninth last year, and look what they did. So I want to fight and fight hard.
We've prevailed through many other things, and we'll prevail through this.
And in fact, the Groton Town Hall already lacing up the gloves. They have a special strategy meeting that is at the Groton Town Hall Annex Tuesday night at 6:30. It is open to the public. We bring in Congressman Rob Simmons at the bottom of the hour. For now, we're live in Mystic. Jim Altman, Fox 61 News at 10.
Thanks, Jim. It was a very rough day throughout New England. The Portsmouth, New Hampshire Naval Base is also on the hit list.
In addition to the Groton Sub Base, Connecticut will lose the Army Reserve Centers in New Haven, Middletown, and Fairfield. Also, the Air Guard Station at Bradley.
In Massachusetts, Westover remains open, but the Army Reserve Center there is slated to close, as is the one at Fort Devens. Otis Air National Guard Base on Cape Cod is also on the hit list, and the Natick Labs are set for realignment.
In Rhode Island, the Army Reserve Centers in Providence and Bristol took a hit, but the Naval Station at Newport and the Quonset Air Guard Station stand to gain 500 jobs from realignment.
This is a nationwide restructuring the Pentagon says will save taxpayers $49 billion over the next 20 years.
The buzzword among military leaders is jointness. It's a term for sharing resources among the branches of the service, streamlining our fighting forces to meet the challenges of the 21st century. But as we've said, it comes at a cost. 33 major bases recommended for closure nationwide, so-called realignments at 29 more than 700 smaller installations mothballed. The cuts would eliminate 29,000 military and civilian jobs.
BRAC is viewing into the next 20 years, and what we're attempting to do is shape our installations around the 21st century Navy in our case.
Now, Connecticut leaders will have to fight to make sure the Navy's future doesn't leave Groton in the past. Now that the list has been released, the Base Realignment Commission will review it. By September 8th, the commission will submit its list to the president. By September 23rd, Mr. Bush will give the entire list a thumbs up or down. If he approves it, barring congressional disapproval, the list is binding 45 days later. If not, the commission goes back to the drawing board and by October 20th submits a revised list of bases to close. Then again, by November 7th, the president must accept or decline those recommendations.
All right, turning to weather now. I guess you could say a very cold wind blew up from Washington today.
It was chilly across the state here. We'll check in now with Chief Meteorologist John Carroll for a first look at the forecast. John.
Yeah, it wasn't just chilly, it was flat out cold. And in fact, we have record cold to talk about. In fact, we have a weather record that was broken, well, sort of. The old record 32 set back in 1962, and we tied it. And so we didn't break the record, we tied the record, but that record is standing for over 40 years. And now we also have to worry about some moisture coming in over the weekend. And as we put our maps in motion in our futurecast, we'll see that Saturday is not going to be that bad. We're going to see probably just clouds increasing, the rain not coming until in the afternoon, and even then it'll be very sporadic and scattered. And then as we go in through to the evening on Saturday, looks like we'll just see a little bit more coming on through. And again, not a lot, just kind of scattered in variety. The bulk of the moisture will probably be here on Sunday, and I'll have details on that in a few.
Today, with the execution of Michael Ross, there are no winners.
Connecticut carries out its first execution in 45 years. We'll get reaction from the hometown of many of his victims and hear from family members.
I feel that this was only a small measure of justice for the pain Michael Ross caused our family.
Plus, hear a first-person account of the execution from Fox 61's Shelley Sindlin, witness to an execution, coming up later on Special Assignment.
There are lots of great reasons to visit your local Simplicity dealer. And here are two brand new ones: the all-new Legacy XL garden tractors and Consumer Z riding mowers. These versatile tractors and zero-turning mowers